7, 1.
Hello, and welcome to the first ever League of Women Voters Greater Hartford and West Hartford Community Interactive Virtual Candidate Debate. We have worked hard to bring this to you, and as you have seen, we are a couple of minutes late getting started, but all things considered, as if we hadn't learned it already, there's no guarantee for perfection, but we are going to do the absolute best that we can. I am Carol Mulready. I am the Voter Service Chair for the League of Women Voters of Greater Hartford, and I will serve as a moderator for this debate, a Democrat primary debate for the 20th Assembly District of Connecticut, located in West Hartford. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages informed and active participation by citizens in government. I am pleased to be joined here for our virtual event by Jennifer Evans, who is our most capable and valued partner and Executive Director of the West Hartford Community Interactive, and by our question chair, Cassie Bachman, and our producer, JP, who is not in view. And most importantly, we welcome our challengers. We have Sherry Haller and Kate Farrar. They are seeking the seat currently occupied by Joe Verrengia in West Hartford. He chose not to run for another term. So in a few moments, we are going to give each candidate an opportunity to have an opening statement for about 2 minutes, and that will be a timed statement. But in the meantime, I want to give you a few hints about what will be happening during this, hopefully about an hour's time. We are conducting it in what is termed a modified cumulative time, which means that the candidates get to talk and answer questions according to their interest, understanding, and philosophy for as long as is necessary for them to answer a question rather than strict time constraints of 1 minute or 2 minutes time. We anticipate that they'll have about 20 minutes each of speaking time, depending on the number of questions we get from our audience. The audience is encouraged to submit written questions via the Q&A tab on your Zoom screen. On mine, it's at the bottom. And the screener, our question screener, our question chair, is going to look at those questions and to avoid duplication and for appropriateness of the legislative seat that is being is going to be part of the election on August 11th, which is also the presidential preference primary. You may submit questions anytime during the event, and we will try to get as many as possible up before you, in addition to the prepared questions that the League of Women Voters has. When each speaker is speaking, when each candidate is speaking, the time is kept by Jen Evans, and the candidates will be informed from time to time about how much time they have left. The candidates are encouraged to rebut and rebut, to state their views, knowing that the time is running. Each round of questions is initiated by me, and I also have the position, if we need to change some time guidelines, we will do it in the interest of answering as many questions as possible. As mentioned, this is our first venture, so thank you for joining us, and I hope that this will help you to understand the valuable contribution these two candidates make in taking the step of running for elective office, which takes a lot of time and effort and study. And we appreciate that you are doing this, and we appreciate the audience that is here with us today. So with no further ado, we will have our candidates give their opening statements. First will be Sherry Haller, and she will be followed by Kate Farrar. So Sherry, the stage is yours. You have to unmute yourself. Our technical knowledge varies across the board.
Well, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with everyone today and introduce myself. My name is Sherry Haller, and I'm very proud to be the endorsed Democratic candidate here for the 20th District. I'm grateful for Representative Joe Verrengia's support. I'm very grateful for former Mayor Scott Slifka's support and for the majority of our district delegate support for this office. I'm honored and I'm humbled by the opportunity to try to serve you in the coming General Assembly session. First, a little bit about me. I am born in Waterbury, but bred in West Hartford. I'm a very proud student of our West Hartford schools and an extremely proud graduate of Concord High School. I also graduated from Southern Connecticut State University with a bachelor's degree in social welfare policy and in community organization, and then attended UConn. And I am a proud graduate of UConn School of Social Work, master's degree in social welfare policy and community organization. I have two great kids, Ariel and my son, Jonathan. Ariel lives in New York City and is a businesswoman and an actor and an acting coach. And my son, Jonathan, although she's here now, thank God. And my son, Jonathan, is a junior at the University of Hartford's Hart School of Music, also majoring in musical theater. I am a grateful breast cancer survivor, and I thank God every day for another day with my family and with my friends and with the work that I do. I'm passionate about a number of issues, but of course, due to COVID, I am not door knocking now, but I've had the opportunity to talk to many voters in our district about the issues that they are concerned with. And I hope we'll get to address many of them, at least partially today. They include education, of course, COVID, senior assistance, tax reform, our youth, healthcare, our working families, and for me, a extraordinarily important area of concern is career readiness and not job development, but career development.
Thank you, thank you very much, Sherry. And we will have opportunity to talk about those issues of interest for you during the course of the debate. Kate, your turn. All right, Kate, you're up.
Great, thank you, Carol. Good afternoon to everyone joining today. I'm Kate Farrar. I am a Democratic candidate in our town for state representative in the 20th District. And I'm running this race as a progressive Democrat with a 20-year track record of leading meaningful change for working families and women and girls, which is why I believe I'm the best choice in this moment to be our state representative. Since I launched this campaign back in January, I've connected with hundreds of voters across the 20th District to hear what is most important to you. And from COVID-19 to the demand for racial justice, our community does recognize that we face monumental challenges. So I'm ready to step up and do the job of state representative on day one. I've led the passage of major new laws from paid family medical leave to pay equity, and I have the relationship skills and know-how to pass laws and bring home investments to West Hartford. Growing up in Connecticut, my husband, Shan, and I choose to live in West Hartford for its diverse community, commitment to education, and vibrant businesses. This is why I'm so proud to earn the support of voters all over our diverse district, young and old, new and longtime residents, Black, brown, and white. And I've been endorsed by former State Representative David McCluskey and incredible organizations such as the Alliance for Retired Americans, Connecticut Women's March, and the AFL-CIO. As your next state representative, I will bring energy and optimism to ensure that together we build a Connecticut that invests in our local small businesses and workforce, that enacts fair fiscal policies for our recovery, and is a state that addresses the long-standing disparities that we have in healthcare and education and housing. I welcome this afternoon in this debate as a real opportunity for me to share how I'll be a progressive champion for fairness and equity as we chart this new future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Welcome again, and we'll begin with probably 2 prepared questions that the League has for you to discuss between each other. And then we will turn to our questions manager to see if we have some good questions from our audience. So first, police accountability has been in the news a lot since the death of George Floyd and others. What is your view of how police accountability should be structured and evaluated in Connecticut, particularly since we have a proposal that's coming before the legislature in this special session that begins next week? And Kate, you are first.
Thank you, and thank you for this question. As we talk about police accountability, I have to say from the outset, to me, in being a resident of West Hartford and growing up in Connecticut, it is long past due that we address systemic racism, not just in policing, but in healthcare and education and our housing. And I'm glad to see and stand in solidarity with many of our Black residents and families and leaders in really asking for change right now in the next special session around police accountability. And in looking at the bill, I do see it as a first step of how we make sure that there's greater accountability and transparency, how we demilitarize our policing, and how we make sure that as a community, we're stepping in for the needs across all of our residents and making sure that we're eliminating bias and addressing racism every step of the way. And so as I talk to voters throughout the district every day, this is a core concern for them. Then to me, I have the experience and know how to work with legislators across the aisle to make sure we're making real change, not on just police accountability, but again, on addressing these longstanding systemic racism issues in our community.
Okay, thank you. Sherry.
Thank you, Carol. So I direct a nonprofit corporation called the Justice Education Center, which is located here on LaSalle Road in West Hartford, and have been doing so for decades. And one of the areas that we focus on is criminal and juvenile justice reform and police reform, police practices reform. About 5 years ago, we received a national award to bring people together from all over the country, specifically to look at trauma interventions, how to restructure policing, and how to bring police and communities together in a trusting and way to promote healing and to promote public safety. So let me start by saying that what we learned from that is as powerful today as it was when we started working on this issue 5 years ago. Black Lives Matter has created a sea change of opportunity to make significant differences in the area of systemic racism. And that I agree with Kate for sure. I think, though, that mostly we have to focus on African-American communities where, in fact, fundamental change around police behavior and training has to take place. And that includes reshifting or shifting the focus of monies that police get, for the most part, to services that communities need. That means trauma intervention. That means mental health services. That means substance abuse services. Those are areas that are not policing functions. They're community development and community need functions that we have to be sensitive to. It's very important that we also look at, and I know it's probably not a popular topic to say, but it is nonetheless incredibly important, that trauma that police face every day is trauma that means their ability to handle stress and their ability to handle potentially violent situations is problematic If we don't look at mental health, and I think that's in the bill, but I'm not sure that it's strong enough. If we don't look, in addition to the mental health and trauma interventions that we need for community members, particularly our kids, if we don't look at police mental health supports, I think we are putting ourselves in greater jeopardy for additional violent acts. So I think those two definitely go hand in hand. And let me close by saying there are a number of very interesting things happening around the country, and I know some police chiefs and community members are looking at them now. One in particular that I would urge people to think about and to maybe research is something happening in New Orleans, in which the police department, which has been under court order for some time, put together a program called EPIC, in which police officers police themselves, in addition to obviously administrators policing them. So if they're in a potentially violent situation, they have learned, their fellow officers have learned skills to calm that officer down before an incident happens. They've had extraordinary success with it in New Orleans, and Georgetown University Law School is now making it a national program, and I know a number of our police chiefs have expressed interest in it. So it's a holistic question and problem. It's a systemic racism problem, and it requires us as consensus builders, I believe, in the legislature, to bring people together to solve it from the ground up. Every community is different. Every need is different in those communities. And we have to work locally for a number of these issues to be solved.
Anything additional for you, Kate? Is there anything in the provisions that they're looking at, the proposal, that's enough or not enough in the attention to police accountability before the legislature?
To me, as was highlighted, it is a starting place, but we have to make sure that we're looking closely at how this is not just a place to start, but how we're really listening to community. And what I hear as I go door to door, with this election, as I talk to voters on the phone and online, is they want to make sure that this is a comprehensive bill, but that it truly is the first step in also addressing our housing segregation issues in the state or our educational inequities. So in the police accountability bill, I think there are great components of it, especially around mental health care and especially around having an Office of Inspector General. But it is a first step, and it's going to be up to us in talking to our community members to make sure that there's accountability and really a community-driven approach.
Okay. A very important issue for the League of Women Voters is, and of course for all voters, is what's going to happen in November and what's going to happen even in our primary here. And this has been in the news a lot, and Denise Merrill has decided to send the application for a ballot to every registered voter, Democrat and Republican, because of the primary. So beyond that, we're also looking at what will happen in November. Do you support the potential of having the same process used in the November election? This is also going to be brought up in the special session. And you start with this, Sherry.
I am totally supportive of mail-in absentee ballots to the greatest extent possible. We have no idea how this pandemic is going to continue or not continue and what it's going to mean. And the opportunity for as many voters to vote as possible, to me, is the ideal situation for us. And I'm very appreciative of all of the work that Denise Merrill and our state leaders have done to make that happen for our primary. I think the actual ballots are being mailed out on the 21st. And I'm hoping that maybe there might be an amendment down the road to our state constitution that would allow us to expand absentee ballots even further. So I'm 120% in favor of it.
Hold on. Get me. It's now your turn, Kate, to respond to this topic on absentee balloting in Connecticut. This is specific to Connecticut.
Yes. Yes. I think what we've learned, and in talking to voters, I've heard the same thing, that people are really surprised, right? That we still have many outdated and restrictive laws on the books in regards to voting access. And therefore, to me, as state representative, I would not only fight to make sure that we continue the option of mail-in voting, but we really pursue early voting. We have to not only make sure that there is access to mail in those ballots for any range of concerns, but really open up the process to make it more amenable to working families, to seniors, to individuals of all ages, and especially historically underrepresented populations in our democracy. And I think that this election and COVID has taught us a lot, and I definitely will be championing a cause to ensure that we're continuing to open up our democracy. And our campaign has been all about making sure that voters are engaged and that new voices are a part of this process. And so to me, that is a very important step in our voting moving forward.
Okay. Very important, of course, and it was mentioned, we have a constitution that says you must appear at the polls. And so what we've been talking about is, an executive order that, kind of bypasses that language. But I think it should be known that we have gotten partway there to change the Constitution with a majority in the legislature, but that has to happen again in the next session in order to implement what you both were talking about as far as early voting and basically non-excuse absentee voting, which I will be saying this to help our listeners so that they know that it's not an easy step and it's not complete after this executive order. All right, I wanted to make sure we got that in because it's very important to the league, and I'll turn to our question master here and see if we have any questions from the audience that might be of interest.
Ladies, we have several very good questions, but I think let's swing back to the COVID discussion. So the question is that COVID has shown a glaring spotlight on the longstanding inequalities in our healthcare system. If elected, what is your plan to correct the flaws in our system to ensure equal access to high quality, affordable healthcare?
And this will go to Kate first.
Great. It's a great question, and I think it's on all of our minds, especially for so many workers who have lost their health insurance through this crisis because of it being tied to an employer. And to me, what is so critical when we think about healthcare right now for our state is especially focused on two things. One is how are we making sure that we are expanding insurance coverage? And we need to do that for people of all income levels and make sure that we're also expanding insurance for our undocumented residents to make sure that everyone in our state has access to health insurance coverage. And then more specifically around healthcare disparities, we've seen that Black and Brown communities in our state not only get COVID at higher rates, but also are passing away and having long-term health consequences at higher rates. So we need to take the steps to address those disparities and make sure that we're not just expanding insurance coverage, but also access. And that means investing in greater amount of community health workers and also making a commitment to increase our collection analysis of data to hold ourselves accountable to make a difference in addressing these disparities.
Okay, Sherry.
Well, on this, Kate and I totally agree 100%. I think one of the things that we should be investing in, and it's an easy one to invest in many ways because the structure is already there. But in our Black and Brown communities, community health centers are a mainstay. They're one of the most critical parts of our Black and Brown communities, and they're relied upon by our working families and our undocumented families as well. If I'm elected, one of the most important areas for us to focus on is not only the coverage, as Kate said, but making sure that the supports are there to continue to offer community health care as much as we can in the communities that need it the most. And if we're switching or trying to redesign our police forces and trying to redirect monies to our communities, that is an area of primary concern and interest to me.
Thank you.
So in relation to that question, some towns in Connecticut have minimum zoning restrictions. For example, a single family house is 2 acres. And this really does tie into what we're talking about as far as access to healthcare, education, equality. So how would you approach calls for a change specifically to zoning?
Okay. Sherry, you want to take that first, and then we'll go to Kate.
Sure. You know, in our district, well, West Hartford in general, but in our district in particular, there's a real need for additional housing availability, particularly when you look at Park Road, for example, where there is the convent that we're trying very hard to create housing and apartment living for our residents. I think with regard to, so first, it's really important in my mind that that development occur. And I know there's a public hearing about that next week. I know there's a great deal of interest in it, and our leaders have been working hard to try to make that happen. So there's an area that I think for our district, we can work on pretty heavily and hopefully make happen. We have created additional housing in our district in Elmwood. We've been able to do it in our industrial district, our business district as well. So this to me is one of the last and most important areas to immediately try to fix. With regard to zoning in general, we've got to sit down at the table with our colleagues and figure out the most important aspects of zoning reform that's going to work for people who would love to move into our community in West Hartford, that's going to work for our other communities throughout the state, because we can't just only have communities in which there are 2 and 3 and 4 acre parcels, and we don't allow others, perhaps who are working family members, to be able to access those communities as well. I think West Hartford's done a very, very wonderful job about that. I'm very pleased with the diversity, honored with the diversity that we have in our community in the 20th district. We have over 20 languages spoken, for example, at Wilcott School. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to work on that issue with our colleagues, and I'm looking forward very much to working with our leaders in our 20th district in our town to ensure that we maximize the amount of housing that's available.
Thank you. Kate.
Yeah, here's the thing, is in our state, affordable housing is a key, not just for having families in our communities, but also for our seniors to really live and thrive and stay in West Hartford. And everyone should have a choice of what town they want to live in and access opportunity. So I do think that it is time as a state to address our longstanding zoning laws. As a state representative, I have talked with businesses up and down Elmwood, up and down New Park, and people are really anxious to create a new vision for our district. And especially in those areas, there's a lot of opportunity, it being a transit-oriented development zone, to make sure that we're bringing in diverse housing and really an incredible amount of business opportunity. And to me, that has to be driven by community voice and us really working together. You know, my career has been really built on being a nonprofit advocate, and I know how to get things done in the legislature. And so for me, it's making sure that we're bringing people together in our community, but also leveraging the state investments that we can make in the transit-oriented development zone, and also addressing issues of zoning across the state so that families and seniors can have affordable housing available in every town and not just West Hartford.
Very good. Yes, go ahead, Sherry.
To also say one other piece about this. There is a program that, frankly, I did not know about until I began seriously thinking of running, that Kate probably knows about and all of you may know about, but maybe some of our listeners and viewers do not. There is a program that will that enables elderly residents, elderly people to apply for lower property taxes in their homes. So with Kate, when Kate was alluding and speaking to the importance of elderly, our valued elderly residents having a say and a choice, certainly with regard to the elderly folk that I have spoken with, the seniors whom I have spoken with in town, there's no question that they're hurting, and there's no question that they need a range of housing opportunities for them in West Hartford, some of which already exist. But it's also important to advance the eligibility and the availability of this program to enable our seniors to be able to stay wherever they would like to stay with lower property taxes.
Okay. Jen, I think it is time to show the candidates how much time they have left. And I'm going to take one question here, prepared question from the league, and then we will go back to questions from the audience. We have to talk about money, budget, taxes. A lot of what has happened during COVID is costing money that was never budgeted for. We have expenses that are being projected for opening schools, for opening businesses, all kinds of things. So what is to be done about taxes at the state level? What can the state do to help municipalities? Are we going to raise taxes, lower taxes, adjust? As a representative, what do you think about raising revenue during this time? And this goes to you first, Kate.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think to your point, Carol, this is on everyone's mind. And as I talk to voters, one of the things that I hear, especially about their concerns moving forward, is making sure that we are listening to science as we address our economic issues as well. So I want to say that first and foremost, because as we consider our state budget, we are doing this in a moment of uncertainty and stress for families, and we have to make sure that we listen to science and put science at the front of making any of our decisions, as we've done so far as a state. But to me, as you set priorities, which is what a budget is, about priorities and your values at the center of it, to me, it has to be all about equity and fairness, and how that is really driving the force in how we set our priorities for our budget. No doubt our state was in a more stable place prior to COVID. We had built up a pretty decent reserve fund, and we are in a moment of great crisis again, not really knowing what the budget is going to look like next year, let alone day to day. And to me, what that means is, especially for our families and for our seniors who are especially worried about their taxes, is I want them to know that as state representative, I am really going to be a true champion and advocate for creating a fairer tax system in our state. That means making sure that middle and income families are not bearing the burden, and that wealthy families do pay a fairer share, because we need to build our budget and close the inequality gaps in our state and make sure that as we come out of this crisis, we are really addressing the equity and fairness issues, not just across our state, but here in West Hartford in the 20th district.
All right, Sherry.
I apologize because you may be hearing a very sick printer printing. So hold on, let me turn that on.
That's one of those little things that I had to unplug my phone.
No, really, I just.
Okay, go for it.
Technology.
What are we going to do about taxes and raising revenue?
So thanks, Carol. I am in favor of, strongly in favor of progressive state income tax. I agree with Kate that in point of fact, our working families have carried this burden for way too long. And the 1% of Those in the 1% and 2% categories have not at all done any heavy lifting on this. And the only way that we can get ourselves out of the crisis that we're in, or one of the only ways that we can get ourselves out of the crisis that we're in, is that we have progressive tax reform. And I am very, very interested in working with our colleagues at the legislature to make that happen. The other piece to this, though, is I'm hopeful, and I have no crystal ball, but I am hopeful that at least in the short term, we are able to rely a bit on Congress again for yet another infusion of dollars, because our small businesses need it desperately. Our working families need it desperately. And until we get through this pandemic, and we don't have any, as I say, crystal ball to figure that out yet, we've got to at least hold our own as much as we possibly can. And we've got to support particularly our businesses and our families until such time as we can see our way out of this.
I would also add that I think what is so critical when you think about growing our economy, especially during this difficult crisis, is that we also have, it is a slight silver lining to continue to promote Connecticut as a great place to live. We've seen the numbers that many folks are moving into the state and really seeing what an incredible place it is to live and work and be a part of our neighborhoods. And I do think that as we consider our future here in the state, one of the things that I'm hearing is just how proud people are to live here, and really how welcoming we can be to folks who are looking to change where they're living and be a part of our neighborhood, which in turn gives greater investment to our economy as well.
Okay, very good. Our time is galloping away here. We have about 20 minutes left, and I really appreciate the detail that you are giving us in your answers. In order to get to, we have at least 8 more questions, I think, that are coming in from our audience. I'm going to try to I would like to ask you to try to see if you could be a little more concise in the answer, and not repeat what the other said if applicable, so that we can get more of these questions. And I have some prepared questions as well, but we'll see which ones are important. Cassie, let's turn it over to you.
So I think 2 issues we want to address before we run out of time are schools and the environment. So starting with schools, how do you propose that they reopen safely? And what would you do to strengthen the schools for the students in our district?
Could you repeat that last part of that, Cass?
Yes. So what would you do to help strengthen the schools in our district?
And that goes to you first, Sherry.
Thank you very much for that question. My organization and I have been working on education reform pre-COVID, and we're certainly working on it now in the midst of this pandemic. There are a couple of things that I think are important to note. The first is that, again, no one has a crystal ball, and as a result of that, the State Department of Education has asked boards of education to create 3 different scenarios all over the state in each board. 1 full opening, 1 a hybrid, virtual learning and and opening, and the 3rd only virtual. And I applaud SDE, the State Department of Education's approach to this, and as I do our leaders and our governor, for a staged return to some form of normalcy, because in fact, we don't know next week or 4 weeks from now what will be. So the idea of having at least 3 options on the table based on Dr. Fauci and WHO and CDC recommendations and our own health experts here in town and in our state, I think is critical. Second, what I think is very important to note is that since COVID began, I guess March perhaps is when this particular piece of information, this particular project started. The State Department of Education has distributed over 12 million meals to kids all over the state. Tens and tens and tens of thousands of meals. It's important to know that that support is there for us and for our children, and that support will continue. So in the midst of the difficulties that we're facing, at least we can say with great deal of gratitude that our kids are being fed breakfast and lunch, and now there are new approaches to helping our kids with dinner as well. And the approaches just for dinner is 290,000 kids. So it's quite something. I think that the most important part of our education piece is that we've got to make sure our teachers are able to be at the table to discuss what is and isn't realistic for them to do. I know they've been burdened. I know virtual learning is difficult. I can say that in some of the work that we do in high schools around the state, in Stanford and Bridgeport and New Haven, virtual learning has worked. But it's worked because the kids are able to do things hands-on and they're able to interact with their instructors. So I'm hopeful that when we look at virtual learning for West Hartford in greater detail, that we do so with the idea of being able to have a lot of hands-on and experiential learning occurring at the same time. So that's basically where I sit on that right now.
All right, Kate, your take on our needs for our schools.
Yes, well, as someone who has attended public education from kindergarten through my time as a proud Yukon Husky, I can tell you that this is front and center, and it definitely is in almost every conversation that I have with families and grandparents, quite honestly, in the conversations across the district. And I think we do have to listen first and foremost from the parents, from the teachers and students and staff, who do want to put a balance together. And that's what will happen with these plans. But I have to say what is most critical to me that I haven't heard enough about and do want to ensure is a core part of our reopening strategy, how we address, again, these disparities moving forward, is how will we make sure that we do have equitable learning from home? We know there were challenges in regards to distance learning and access to technology, and that needs to be front and center as we think about these plans. We also have to make sure that we're addressing the needs of students with intellectual and developmental disabilities who have significant needs throughout each of these plans that are being put together. And as state representative, I will advocate every step of the way to make sure that, yes, everyone is safe and heard during this process, but that we have equity at the front and that we're really paying attention to the needs of all students.
May I speak to that very briefly, Carol, if you don't mind?
Yes, you can rebut.
Thank you. No, not a rebuttal, really. It's just an add-on. We have an education cost sharing formula in Connecticut, and it's a cost sharing formula that I don't think takes into account what it really costs to educate children in our district. And I'm hoping that if I become representative, that's an area of great concern to me, particularly because of the rich cultural diversity that we have in the 20th, so that we make sure, and we have significant poverty in the 20th as well. And taking a look at the formula and making changes to that formula to enable us in West Hartford to have a greater piece of that pie is, I think, a critical piece of work that we need to do.
And I would just say, I know we're speaking around K through 12, but for families across our district, early care education is so essential too. And we can't even think about moving forward in reopening our economy without early care and K through 12 education. And we need to continue to be advocates at the federal level to make sure that we're not only getting investments in small businesses, but really in our early care system, because it is really the lifeblood of making sure that our kids grow up supported and that they are being taken care of and educated at the youngest ages in our community. And I want that to kind of ring clear in this moment, because we can't kind of separate the two. And to me, as state representative, in all of my work in passing landmark bills such as paid leave and pay equity, it's all about making sure that we're thinking about all of working families' needs. And right now, that's not just K through 12 education, it's also the early care system.
Thank you. Cassie, you have a question on environment. I have some things as well.
So what do you think our district can do to improve our response to climate change? And as a small follow-up to that, how would you address the need for investment in the green economy?
All right, that goes first to Kate.
Well, climate change is a crisis. It's still a crisis. Just because COVID has stepped up in front of us, it doesn't mean that climate change isn't happening around us. And Connecticut does have to be a leader as we protect and defend our environment. Quite honestly, still right now from Trump administration policies. So as state representative, I would pursue to build a green economy. We have seen some good changes even in the last year, particularly around some wind and solar projects in our economy. But we do have an opportunity to make sure that as we envision transportation of the future, especially in our Elmwood and New Park neighborhoods, that we're really prioritizing transportation that is green, that prioritizes transit, that prioritizes electric vehicles, cycling, and pedestrian use. And we have to make sure that that is a part of our vision, and something to me as state representative, I will champion and really work with our residents every step of the way to have their voice be heard.
Thank you. Sherry. You have to unmute yourself. There she
Hear me
is.
now?
Yes,
Okay.
you are.
So I have not yet read in detail the plan that our candidate, our Democratic candidate for president, has put forth just a few days ago, a rather extensive green plan that I think will have impact for Connecticut and for the rest of the country if we're fortunate to have him elected. And tied to that green plan, which, as I say, is extremely extensive, is a tie to job development, career development, retraining. And I want to mention that it's a part of the environmental crisis, because we are at a very, very wonderful crossroads from the standpoint of potentially marrying the two. We will have thousands of people out of work post-COVID in Connecticut. If we are able to create a green plan that will enable us to retrain and to then bring more young people into the workforce with training in those areas, it is a win-win for all of us.
Thank you. I have a question that has some very specific pieces to the environmental question. The League of Women Voters has been for years supportive of protecting our environment. And we realize that it's sometimes taken for granted, especially in times like this. But we also know that money is required in the budgets of the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection in order to keep it going and to start to promote some of the actions that you're talking about. But it is going to take money, and I want you to address that a little bit. But I have a couple of very specific things that we thought you might as well address because they're likely to come up in the legislature. And so, would you support legislation for any or all of these environmental policies? And you can do yes, no, or if you want to tell a little bit about the details, you're welcome to do that. Number one is public education and funding initiatives to remove invasive plant and animal species. I'm just going to go through them and then you can choose which you want to speak to. The second one is preservation of forests and other open spaces as critical carbon sequestration and wildlife habitat zones. Third, extreme reduction of lawn and garden chemicals, pesticides, and herbicides. And fourth, extreme reduction of plastic packaging. So we've got invasive species, protection of forests and open spaces, chemicals, use of chemicals in on lawns and such, and plastic packaging. So this, I believe, goes to Sherry first. I think I'm in the right order.
Thank you, Carol. I certainly support all of that. I am most interested in the preservation of our forests and our open spaces. I'm involved a bit with saving Knob Road in Avon. It's one example of a developmental growth, a development that isn't potentially very necessary and will be destroying yet another open space in Avon. And even though it's not in West Hartford, where we don't have a lot of open spaces, it's certainly adjacent to it. Our office has worked very closely with UConn Extension Service on a variety of issues around this, and particularly as it relates to the possibility of being able to use farmland as an agricultural teaching tool for inner city kids. So I'm incredibly committed to that in particular. And that would be where I would focus a good deal of my energy.
Thank you. Kate.
Yes, I appreciate the specificity by the league, and I appreciate that because, as you all well know, it really helps to make sure that we are making focused change. And to me, in regards to the environmental actions that you mentioned, to me, what's most critical for the 20th district would be the reduction of single-use plastic and foam products, actually. I think if you look at our district and really kind of the use, but then also really the disposal, we are contributing a lot to that environmental problem. And that's where I really think that we can have the greatest voice and change to affect the lives of us as everyday residents here, that could really contribute long-term to the environmental sustainability of our state.
Okay, thank you. Cassie, do you have another question you'd like to share?
Well, as we only have a couple minutes left, what about?
We can go beyond, Jennifer just told me.
What will be your first priority if elected?
Okay, so this goes to Kate first.
Sure. The most important issue that I would say facing our district in this moment, as we think about COVID-19 and the effects of that and the health and safety of our neighbors, is really fighting as a voice for you and a voice for our district to expand affordable healthcare and control prescription drug costs and address the healthcare disparities during this crisis. You know, this is so essential for our working families who are losing healthcare from their employers, and also for our seniors who continue to struggle to make ends meet. And so to me, as state representative, you know, I will make sure to use my proven skills and experience and relationships to pass the legislation that is needed and really continue to listen to constituents to get through this health crisis and really to bring our district together to make sure that we're expanding affordable healthcare for all.
All right, Sherry.
I think one of the first things, and it's very hard to pick one, actually, but one of the first things that I would want to focus on is the opportunity for our educational system to be one that strengthens and supports even further those students who are not college bound. And we have many of them in our district. And the question that gets raised about that is, what can we do to make sure our youth who are graduating, who are not college bound, cannot just go into a job, but go into a career. And in my office, we have spent many, many years working with unions, and I'm proud to have the support of the laborers union and of the carpenters union, creating opportunities, pre-apprenticeship opportunities for kids who are overage and under credit, who may be at risk for a variety of issues, including health issues, and being able to allow them the opportunity to get those credits while they're still in high school, to get trained while they're still in high school, and then move forward and become involved in a technology career or get additional credentialing through community colleges. But when I look at the justice systems, a massive amounts of money that gets spent in incarcerating our youth, and I worry that our kids do not have a future unless they are college bound, or at least that's how they feel. I'm thrilled that I could work on and bring my expertise to the legislature around making sure there are opportunities for kids who are not college bound as well.
All right. Question Master, do you have another good one for us?
This one's a bit long, so stick with me, please. Studies have shown that Black women are the most loyal Democratic voters. Can you speak about your outreach to Black women and the Black community in the 20th District? What is your relationship and experience with eliminating barriers for Black women and girls and their community?
Okay, and I've forgotten who got the first question the last time, or the first shot the last time. So I don't know if it matters to you. Let's start with you, Kate.
Sure. I really appreciate the question because at the heart of it is that our district in the 20th District is the most diverse area in all of West Hartford. And to me, when we talk about addressing the racial disparities in housing and healthcare and education, so often, especially in the work that I've done to lead on issues of pay equity and healthcare and education for women and girls, where we see the greatest gaps are for Black and African American women. And to really address those needs and gaps head on, it takes interventions that address that data and build those relationships. So across the 20th District, as I've been talking and engaging with voters, I've really been ensuring that not only are we bringing a diverse group of new voices into the campaign, but that my priorities are being informed by those voices. So as we think about the needs, particularly of Black women in our state and making sure that they are front and center in addressing racial inequity, we have to address, number one, some of the economic barriers, making sure that we're investing in women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses that have often not received those investment dollars. Number two, we have to make sure that Black women's health and the data and disparities are addressed. So particularly around Black women's maternal health, we have a significant issue in our state that we can make change on and address not only the needs, but also through expanded healthcare insurance access and also through expanding access to doulas. And finally, particularly for Black women, as we address the pay gap issue, which is quite large for Black women in our state, we have to make sure that Black women are being supported in the workplace, that we're addressing issues of hair discrimination, that we're opening doors to college education, but as was said, to pathways to high wage, high growth careers for Black women. So to me, it's all about making sure that as we're addressing these disparities, that I'm engaging every step of the way, the core voices that need to be heard. And this campaign is all about bringing new voices to the table. And I'm proud to have many Black women engaged as volunteers and supporters in this campaign.
Thank you. Sherry.
Thank you, Carol. It's a great question. In our work for many decades, we have engaged with Black and brown women and families and have been very sensitive to and continue to be very sensitive to their issues and their needs. And I'm going to return to what I said a moment ago because I think it's absolutely critical. There are numerous women who graduate, young girls who graduate from high school, who do not have the skill levels to compete, to even attempt to compete. And one of the things that we have to do in statewide, and that we have to do more of here in West Hartford, if we can, is to create opportunities create pathways that are not necessarily going to require a 4-year education and debt and encumbered debt and so on. And there are many pathways that women of color can compete in if they have the skills to do so. And we have not put enough money and enough resources into the kinds of training that all people of color, but most particularly women, Black and brown women, need in order to compete. So that's number one. And something else I want to say about this that turns us back to COVID for a moment. I'm incredibly concerned that there's a reduction in the number of domestic violence reports that have been made since COVID. And of course, we all know that domestic violence disproportionately hits women of color. I'm very concerned that because everyone is sequestered, people are isolated, there isn't the opportunity to make the calls that need to be made. I don't know how to solve that, but I want to raise it because I think it's critical. There's got to be some more community outreach in order to do that. It also holds true for our children, because when they went to school, if a kid raised his hand and you might see a bruise, there was another set of eyes for those children. We don't have that right now either. And so as we proceed forward with this crisis, I think one of the areas, particularly for Black and brown families and for women and for people who are impoverished and who may have the short end of the stick around training and also around healthcare, and certainly around some of the abuse that we've learned about through the data. I hope that there are avenues that we can create to support them.
All right, we have had some very, very important topics discussed here. And I was just looking at the list and there are good questions still going on. I'm going to turn and I'm not sure if this is going to be our last question. I know Jen told us we could go over with the timing. We started a little bit late, but I want to return to the special session for next week. One of the things that is going to be discussed is telemedicine. And we talked, telemedicine is not always paid by insurance companies. It hasn't been recognized in many of the insurance companies as an alternate to a face-to-face visit. So the question is, what do you think about the pros and cons of this issue that is supposed to discuss whether it is a good idea to require insurance coverage of this method of medical treatment? And this goes to Sherry first.
Thanks, Carol. I will admit that I do not know as much about this topic as I would like to, and I look forward to learning more about it next week. But on its face, it seems to me an obvious answer is that, of course, insurance companies should cover telemedicine, just like it should be covering regular doctor visits in a much more equitable way. That's all I have to say about it right now.
Okay, and go ahead, Kate.
Yes, I think this item in the special session will address, hopefully, what has often been barriers to healthcare access, not just in this moment, but hopefully as we recover from COVID as well. And I have to say that, especially in hearing from doctors and nurses and other providers, telehealth is a way of making sure that they're really hearing and able to connect with patients no matter where they are. And that's good for medicine, it's good for patients, and it's good for preventative health. And as you think about, not just this issue, but especially our public health issues moving forward, I am a proven advocate for affordable healthcare and working people. And I've been listening to nurses throughout this campaign. I've been endorsed by AFT, which includes nurses at UConn Health. And to me, this type of policy and many of our policies around healthcare, we have to listen to the providers to make sure that they're really being able to provide the care no matter the emergency. And that's what I think we've really seen in the ability to provide telehealth.
Right, thank you. Kathy, our question master, I saw that there was a question regarding the Second Amendment, and I think that's very different from the other questions that we have been dealing with today, so I would like you to ask that one.
All right. So, question is, how are you going to balance Second Amendment rights with the need for better gun control?
So this goes to Kate first. I will just, a personal comment. I was surprised when I learned that Connecticut has an open carry law. I didn't know that. And anyway, Kate, start with you.
Yeah, I think what we've learned in Connecticut, specifically over the past 10 years, is that we can have common sense gun reform and also reduce violence. So I completely support the legislation that was passed in 2013 and 2019, which was about the ban of weapons such as assault weapons and ghost guns, and the creation of the Weapon Offenders Registry, and all about safer storage. Where we go from here is we have to stay vigilant in using that common sense moving forward. And I think where we can really make the most effort is supporting ways to broaden what is Connecticut's red flag law, which can promote greater gun safety, and also invest thoroughly in what are evidence-based community violence prevention programs. To me, we have proven in Connecticut that we can do this in a common sense way. And as state representative, I really look to continue that.
Thank you. All right, Sherry. You have to unmute yourself.
I do wonder why it keeps muting. It's strange, but thank you. Two things that are really important, I think, to mention. We have an extraordinary group of organizations in Connecticut that have advocated for common sense gun control. And they include Moms Against Guns, they include Connecticut Against Gun Violence. And I'm incredibly impressed with their work and look forward, I hope, to working with them if I'm elected. One of the things that's most important about where they're heading now, in addition to, of course, proposing additional gun control laws, is that they are seeing the incredibly important connection between gun violence prevention and gun violence. And when we look at the percentage of young African Americans who are being maimed and killed on a very regular basis in our inner cities, we certainly know that is a high proportion of our gun casualties in Connecticut. And the idea of being able to create preventative programs and have that be a part of any strategy and intervention programs is key. In my office, we're the fiduciary agent for Project Longevity, which is a gang violence reduction program in the state. And we're the fiduciary agent also for Project Safe Neighborhood, which is a prevention and early intervention set of programs for kids who are at risk or kids who are already involved in the justice system. And these are the kids often who are involved in gun violence. So I very much look forward and hope I will be able to work with those organizations and others if I'm fortunate enough to be elected.
All right. And so while we don't want to end on a note where we wish we didn't have the problem, I would like to invite you as your last comment for today You've mentioned going around the community and talking with people, and this is based on a question that came through. Tell us about one thing or one event during your last year that showed you something about West Hartford that you didn't know or that was especially wonderful.
Oh,
Start with Sherry.
that's a great question. That's really a great question. I'm sorry it only has to be one, but I'm in love with eating out. I don't cook, just need to say that right up front. And so I spend a lot of time in restaurants, and I spend a lot of time at caterers, pretending that I cook when I bring the stuff home. I am thrilled with and enjoy all of the restaurants that I have visited in this last year in our district. And I've had the opportunity through those visits and lots of calories to learn a great deal about why people in our district love it so. And I think that the most important thing I've come away with is the need to make sure that our district residents are at the table when it comes to any development or any change that's going to be happening in our community, because we are a vibrant, culturally diverse, extraordinary community that wants to participate and wants to be involved. And let me just end with one other thing that concerns me about COVID, and that is this. We have West Farms Mall. I have no idea what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen with West Farms Mall. And we as leaders, both on the state level and on the local level, and I'm sure that's happening with our leadership as we speak, have to think about proactive approaches with massive amounts of contingency based on what's going to happen in the next 6 months to a year. So our people in the 20th district have to be sitting at that table as well, because they know best what's best for our district. And we're not like Bishop's Corner, and we're not like Blueback, and we're not like West Hartford Center. We are our own wonderful conglomeration of families that need to be at the table to make change.
All right, thank you very much. And Kate.
Yes, and I appreciate the sentiment of having to choose one. During this time of social distancing and wearing masks during COVID, I've been so heartened to see our West Hartford community come together at that socially distanced way, but really to show solidarity and support for our community. So I've seen that in the opening of our new Quasar Pride flag. I've also seen that with the Witness Jones Project. But I think what really stuck with me in the last couple months was our town's first celebration of Juneteenth. It happened on Goodman Green, which is a green named after a slave owner in our town. And it was the first time, and it shouldn't have been the first time, and certainly won't be the last, but it was the first celebration and really acknowledgement of our history here in West Hartford of slave ownership, but more importantly, celebrating the freedom and steps that we need to take to address racial justice in our own community. And to me, in seeing all of the faces of young and old, Black, white, and brown, and new and longtime residents there, really proved to me just how committed our community is to the long-term change that we need to make. And as state representative, I've been fighting my whole life for working families and women and girls. And we have to center racial justice in all of the changes that we make as state legislators. And I'm proud to be a public leader standing side by side and in solidarity with Black Lives Matter and all of the Black and brown members of our community.
Thank you very much. I think that turned out to be a very good question for us to end this program. And I give you my very sincere thanks for running in the 20th district and letting us know your views about your community and how you will contribute to our state legislature. I am very thankful for our work with the West Hartford Community Interactive, formerly known as West Hartford WHC-TV. And so, Jennifer, thank you very much for all your work, and JP's help is much appreciated. And to Cassie for helping monitor these questions so that we could be as calm and professional as possible. So everyone out there listening, we encourage you to vote in a primary if you are either Republican or Democrat. We have those in West Hartford. Those of you in the Elmwood area will be finding Kate and Sherry on your ballot. So you will have the privilege of and the right to vote and pick your candidate. And we thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today. For those of you in the audience who are not sure where your registration lies, make sure you go to the Secretary of the State's office or online or to the Registrar of Voters to find out if you are registered and where it is you vote. There is one change in the 20th district this year. Instead of Elmwood Community Center, Charter Oak School will be used.
Yep.
So one of the addresses you can go to is http://myvote.ct.gov/lookup to find whether you are registered. And for anyone that's moved since the last time you voted, you are not registered. You need to file a new form. So again, thank you all. Make sure everybody gets out there to vote and share this information with anyone in the 20th district that can benefit from hearing this debate. Again, thank you all.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. And you may check your leave button.